If children are to have a purpose in life, it is to honor their parents. Not disappointing them when they have given so much is important to most of us. Sometimes, a little detail from the past pops up and puts things in perspective as a painful truth resurfaces. 60 years later, he notices something troubling on his parents' wedding video. The day Joel Smith watched the video of his parents' wedding, he realized how much happiness he had yet to strive for. To see his parents young and so happy. In addition, they had managed to start a family that gave him a lot of hope for the future in his own life. Moreover, while watching the video, he saw a detail that took his breath away, and that's where it all started. What had he seen in the video? Their history dates back to several years. The young man's father and mother were already in love when they were still very young. It is not always easy to start a love affair in high school and find a continuation. Joel's parents were called Joe and Beverly. Lovers of high school, they complemented each other well since he was an athlete and she was a cheerleader. If school romances rarely last, this one had something special. A year after the start of their relationship, he proposed to her and she accepted. For the engagement, Joe wanted to mark the occasion, and what he gave her will remain etched in stone. It was only decades later that a detail spotted by their son in their wedding video will shed light on their special story. And yes, they had said yes in front of everyone, despite their young age. Everyone liked them very much. They really made a beautiful couple. You only have to see the photos of their wedding to realize it. At the time, marriage was not something to be put off until later. Joe and Beverly said yes in 1953 at the age of 19. They settled in upstate New York, where they did everything they could to build a family. The wedding was filmed by a friend of theirs. It was an event neither of them wanted to forget. They had no idea that this video, that many would consider being that of a banal wedding, would end up sparking a radical turn. It's a video that looks ordinary. However, it is not in reality. To understand it, you have to look at it carefully, a bit like looking for a missing piece on a puzzle. Looks like that's what the couple's son did. If their happiness was contagious around their perimeter of life, thousands of kilometers away, life and death mingled in what is most tragic. For 3 years, the United States had been engaged in the Korean War, and the situation was not the calmest. If they obtained information through the press, Joe and Beverly were not affected by this conflict as it did not concern them. They did not know it, but this war was going to destroy their first years of marriage and have bad consequences on their life. At first, they thought that this conflict would have no impact on their married life. Normally, Joe was not in the military, and neither was his wife, but they had forgotten the fact their country was heavily involved in this armed conflict, and the fallout was not going to be long in coming. Joe suspected it a little, but the moment that had to come arrived. The newly married young man was called up for the American Army. He who hoped to push back the deadline as much as possible when overtaken by reality. While Joe and Beverly had started to make plans for their life together, the young soldier had to give up everything to serve his country in a war he had not wanted. It was the start of a terrible sacrifice for the couple, which will have big consequences for the future. When the nation needs one of its sons, he cannot refuse, and like a good patriot, Joe answered the call. It wasn't easy for him. The plans he had made with his sweetheart would fall apart overnight because of this war. Joe didn't know exactly what the military had planned for him. Was he going to be sent to fight, weapon in hand, or was he going to serve some other purpose? What was certain was that he would go to Korea. Death in the heart, Joe and Beverly had to prepare before his departure. In Joe's absence indefinitely, the couple had to sell some of their possessions to make ends meet. Without Joe's income, life wasn't going to be easy for the young woman, who couldn't imagine how much this war would follow her throughout her life. It was the beginning of the torments in this couple so young and so united. It was as though Providence was testing them. They, who were promised never to separate, would eventually be separated, not by death, but by war. It was heartbreaking. What do you think about it? Thanks to the means of communication of the time, Joe had managed to keep in touch with his wife. Regularly, they sent each other letters and photos to update each other as much as possible. Very worried, Beverly had only one question in mind. Would Joe come back alive from this war? And if so, in what condition? And above all, when? The young woman could not count the days since her man had left to fight an enemy she did not know. It was so painful for her to have to live without her man by her side. Letters and the like didn't mean much. It just reassured her that her husband was alive and nothing more. She couldn't see him, touch him, or kiss him, and it felt horrible. The war had taken its toll. Thousands of people died during this conflict, not to mention the material damage with all that entailed. Finally, after many long months, Joe returned home. Safe and sound, he had become an American hero who had fulfilled his duty as a patriot. That being done, he could now resume his life and pick up where he left off with Beverly. This is how one of their plans came true. Beverly got pregnant. And that first pregnancy was definitely not going to be the last. She got pregnant again. From childhood, children heard their father's war stories, but also the parents loved to tell them what life was like before they were separated by this murderous madness. Life was peaceful within this family. Over the years, children became parents and parents became grandparents. Joe and Beverly had made their dream come true. The couple had always wanted to build a family to pass on their heritage. And after having lived this heartbreaking ordeal of separation during the war, they could only rejoice to have been able to realize this dream after so many trials that they had gone through. And that year, the couple celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary, a step that absolutely had to be celebrated. This is how the whole family gathered around the old couple to celebrate their love. For this occasion, they had prepared a lot of delicious food. They were in a great mood until a surprise arrived. But what happened in the end? A friend of theirs had brought with him an invaluable gift, a video of their wedding, 60 years earlier. And of course, family members were thrilled to be able to watch this video. But what did it contain? In reality, no one expected it, much less Joe and Beverly. The couple was really very surprised. This friend had waited for the right day and the right time to take it out of the boxes in his cellar, and he had done very well. All the guests gathered around the television to watch this moment, which had forever marked the life of the couple. Joe and Beverly's children were especially attentive while watching this video, although they had never seen them before. But at one point, their son Joel noticed a detail in the video. What had he seen on this video? While watching this video, Joel took care to scrutinize the smallest images that appeared on the video. He didn't look at the pictures the same way the others did, and the results were not long in coming. Faced with the images of this special day that paraded, Joel stopped on something he had heard about since his childhood. It was an asset that his parents had owned in the early years of their marriage and to which they were very attached. Joel noticed that his parents had left the church in a red 1948 Plymouth convertible, a beautiful model that had made the young couple proud and was so special to them. But why is that? The couple, who were really very young at the time, had chosen a major vehicle. It should be noted here that this car had a place of choice within this couple. He had always heard of this red car, which meant so much to them, like the start of a new life. Like a pet, this car was part of the family. And as he watched the wedding footage, Joel realized he couldn't just sit idly by and let this car be a distant memory. Something had to be done to bring a smile back to the couple who had been married for 60 years. For as long as he can remember, Joel's earliest memories were not his, but those of his parents. When they were just newlyweds, Joe and Beverly had made many sacrifices to be able to afford this superb car. The young man had even asked his mother for money to add to his personal savings so that he could buy the precious car. By giving him this money, Joe's mother and Joe had agreed on one thing. Joe had to repay this money every week based on his salary and earnings. So, they bought the car in 1953. Joe and Beverly bought it before fate played a trick on them. 60 years ago, this type of car was not uncommon, but driving one was a sign of success. The couple was so proud of their purchase that they drove their resplendent vehicle all the time. Often, the hood was not needed to take advantage of the fresh air. Life was really good then. But there was something that completely changed their happiness. Joe's call to join his country's armed forces. In order to not run out of money during his absence, the couple had to sell this precious car that they found was so hard to afford. It was double the penalty for the couple. Not only did they have to adapt to the departure of Joe, but also to the absence of this magnificent car. This car was in all their photos and videos, and it made their son Joel think that this car held a big place in his parents' hearts at that time, and that if it hadn't been for this war problem, his parents would never have sold it. In their wedding video, as their son Joel had noticed, this car took a very special place. The car meant so much to the couple that it seemed like an important part of their family. Watching the videos, Joel, who had only heard of this convertible but had never seen it, looked at his parents in wonder at this car. For a moment, a crazy idea crossed his mind, and he couldn't hold back his excitement. Joel had a brilliant idea: to allow his parents to relive the moments they had lived when they were married. This urge was not born so suddenly. Indeed, since always, Joel wanted to offer something to his parents to thank them for raising him with all their love and care. Watching the video of their wedding, he realized that he had finally found the perfect gift: a red Plymouth from 1948. Joel's goal was very simple, that of making his parents happy as they had been during the wedding. But how was he going to find the same model as that of his parents? This task was not going to be easy. It was far from easy. If a network of collectors necessarily exists for this type of car, its age and the red color made the operation even more complicated because of its rarity. Joel had had a very good idea, but that was not at all going to be enough to bring back the moments spent with his parents. It was necessary to materialize the project. How was he going to carry out this project? After weeks of research, Joel realized that the task was going to be even more complicated than he thought. He had found 3 cars that matched, but 2 had already been sold and a third was on display in a museum. It was then that an unexpected event occurred. His research had finally paid off. After long hours of scouring ad sites on the internet, Joel had finally found a car that matched his parents' car. But the best was yet to come, and Providence was going to help in this direction. The great news is that the owner said it was in excellent condition and had waited quietly in a garage for years. Posted on the Craigslist site, the ad explained that the red Plymouth convertible had never been driven in winter, emphasizing its excellent condition and low mileage. But not everything was going as well as the post said about it. There was something that was going to rock. But what was it? The ad was posted by an owner who was aged. The car was not ready to have a customer so quickly because it was several years old. At least, that's what the owner of this vehicle thought. The research was all the more difficult as the publication made was not really complete. In fact, the offer only mentioned the description of the convertible, but did not display any photos. The 81-year-old seller didn't know how to add images to his post. Optimistic, Joel decided he had to go there to try it. So he sent a friend of his to the state of Indiana to go and check if the car matched his parents' car. He didn't know what his friend would find yet. Once there, Joel's friend erased his doubts. The car matched. He sent pictures to Joel and he saw immediately that it was the right one. Everything was very serious. The seller even kept the original invoices and manual. Neither 1 nor 2, Joel decided the sale and sent the money to the seller. He had finally bought the red Plymouth convertible from 1948, which meant a lot to his elderly parents. Once he had everything sorted out, Joel had to move on to the next phase. Now, he just had to wait for the car to arrive in New York to see their reaction, to which he was really not prepared. Arriving in New York, Joel wanted to hide it while waiting to be able to surprise his parents. He had no room at home and did not want to risk his father seeing it. For the vehicle to be up to date, it had to be groomed to see if everything is in order. And for that, it was necessary to see a specialist. And luckily, Joel knows how to count on his friends. Indeed, another one of his friends, who was the manager of a car dealership, did him a great service. The problem was, his father knew everyone in town, including this dealership. Fortunately, this last-named Donnie achieved something really incredible that Joel did not expect. Donnie had a really good surprise. Since this vehicle was a surprise for Beverly and her husband, they were not supposed to see it before D-Day. So Donnie hid the vehicle and took the opportunity to take care of it, giving it a wipe and checking that everything was in order. Meanwhile, Joel continued to prepare the long-awaited surprise, and the man was determined to do it big. He really wanted to mark the occasion. Joel really wanted his parents to find out about their gift in the best possible way, so he needed someone to make sure they didn't find out before time. He therefore asked someone very close to take care of it personally, and it was done nicely. For this, Joel decided to take out the heavy artillery. He asked his oldest son, Colby, to help him make everything perfect for his surprise. To achieve his ends, Joel needed all the help he could get. Colby had planned to ask his grandparents something that they would have to accept, and that would be very convenient for Joel. So Colby arrived at their house and offered to leave for a weekend of fishing. The goal of this blanket was to drown the fish so Joe and Beverly wouldn't have a second suspect that a real surprise was being prepared. His son Colby had arrived with a hidden camera to film the moment his grandparents discovered the car in the front of their house. He began to prepare fishing equipment with his grandfather while waiting for the car to arrive. During this time, Joel drove the Plymouth to his parents' house. Yep, unbelievable as it sounds, it was the car that had transported the bride and groom to their courtship. The same car they had cherished so much 60 years ago. Just parked in front of their house, he was far from imagining the reaction of his parents to this beautiful gift. As Joel saw his father arrive in the car, he pulled out his camera to capture Joe and Beverly's reaction. Everything has been prepared and everything was now ready. There were only a few minutes left before his grandparents discovered the surprise their son had prepared for them. The grandparents had not understood that Colby had just installed a camera and that he was filming them. Then, he told them he had to go outside to see something. The gift was about to be revealed, and the family was going to have a very emotional time. Seeing their grandson stepping outside, Joe and Beverly looked out the window and couldn't help but see the red car parked in front of their house. It was like going back to the past, but it was all real and in the present. They went out to see it more closely. Stunned, the old couple approached the red car, which obviously brought back many memories. They couldn't believe their eyes. It was a priceless gift to them. But what happened next elicited so much emotion from everyone present. Seeing this car parked in front of their house, it was very impossible for Beverly and her husband to ignore what they had seen. It was still the same model of car that had transported them when they got married 60 years ago. Even though in the first moment, Joe and Beverly did not understand why this car was parked in front of their house, the memories quickly came to the surface and took them back to the 1950s. Very moved, but also eager to talk to them, their son Joel stepped out of the red Plymouth convertible from 1948. It was a moment he had lived dozens of times in his head and was finally living for real. He left the driver's door open as a symbol. In shock, Joe and Beverly had lots of questions about what they were going through. Was it real or was it a dream? Oh no, it was not a dream, but a reality. The car was nice and there. It was the first time in decades that they had seen this car again and wondered what their son had in store for them. Then, in a gesture that Joel had dreamed of, he handed the keys to the convertible to his parents. "This car is yours," he says with wet eyes. Plunged into their gaze, he probably didn't expect his father to react the way he was going to. Faced with this, the two newlyweds could not really contain themselves. It was probably the best gift we had given them in so long, Joel said. Grandmother Beverly was very moved by this gift, and she kept turning around the car to see it from all angles. She hadn't realized that her husband Joe had sat in the driver's seat and had burst into tears. Joe had just relived in a few minutes his departure for Korea, the reluctant sale of his red car, and the sacrifices of war. But 60 years later, the circle was complete and everything was back to normal. Now, there was only one thing left to do. Now that they were sure it was their vehicle, Joe and Beverly got in to try it out. It was like the good old days. After some big hugs, Joe and Beverly knew what to do. Keys in hand, they got into the car and Joe started the engine. They immediately remembered the sound of the exhaust and the sensations of the vibrations on the seats. Proud and above all, very happy, the old couple started to ride while their son Joel and grandson Colby continued to film them. To them, it was as if they had waited for this moment all their lives, and it was finally here.